Hello. Will the last person to leave GB News please turn off the lights? Okay, so if you have been living under a rock for the past week or so, then you won't know about the Laurence Fox, Dan Wooton and GB News controversy. I made another video about the hypocrisy of it all. I'll leave a link in the description. And also, if you're on YouTube, you can get a link on the screen as well. Right. What happened was this, just a quick recap. Laurence Fox said he didn't want to shag Ava Evans or Santorini or Santini or whatever she's called. And that's possibly not surprising because she kept putting out tweets also in that linked video where she talks about people in terms of whether or not she wants to shag them. Yeah, that's a nice lady. And so that was Laurence Fox's mistake. It was a very bad mistake. It was very rude, and it wasn't, well, yeah, it was just very rude. And he should have been suspended for that, and he should have been pilloried for that, but it wasn't misogynistic. It was just terribly bad manners. Just like her tweets were terribly bad manners, I might say. Now, what happened during that conversation, that online conversation, was that Laurence said this, and Dan Wooton, who was the other partner in the conversation, laughed. And then he said something about Ava Evans being a very beautiful woman. It was obvious he was trying to soften the blow somewhat. It was equally obvious that he wasn't thinking on his feet quickly enough. But who of us does all the time? So they suspended Laurence Fox after this huge outcry from a lot of people hooting misogyny, which it wasn't. And then they suspended Dan Wooton as well. Now, Dan Wooton he's in an awkward position because he was accused of bad behaviour in when he was working in other media, and he's not been convicted. Nothing has been put to the test. There's been no trial. There's been no serious inquiry, nothing. But the allegations have come up. So he was actually sacked from another media he was working in. But GB News hung on to him, and then they were just looking for an excuse. And they found it in this foaming shit show. Do excuse the language, but I can't think of any other way of describing it. They suspended him when this came up. So they found a way of getting rid of two of their most colourful characters. And then, guess what? Calvin Robinson, who has made a career basically out of being the captain of the awkward squad, has told GB News that he won't go on air as long as Dan Wooton is suspended. This is somebody with principles. You may not agree with his opinions, but you have to agree that he has principles. Dan Wooton was just not thinking quickly enough there, and maybe he could have handled it better, but that's no reason to suspend him. And Calvin Robinson is saying that, and so they suspended Calvin Robinson as well. Now, GB News has to... Oh, before I talk about that, I'll remind you, I'm granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds, also on Twitter and Gab, where I let you know when I've uploaded a new video. You can help my video by liking it. I would appreciate that. But if you go to the links, you will also find links to donation sites. I'm always very grateful for donations. The generosity of some of you has enabled me to buy this new camera, which is a lot better, and I can look it in the eye a lot easier than my old clunky, like 5-year-old webcam, or it may have been even been older than that. Right, so as I say, I appreciate that. But if you like the video, that helps the spread of the video, the distribution, which also earns me a little extra. So yeah, please like the video. Okay, yeah, and if you're subscribed, especially on YouTube, remember, click the notification button, because otherwise you don't get notifications. That makes sense, doesn't it? All right, GB News suspended Calvin Robinson. Now, this is where I give GB News some advice, like I'm a big businesswoman, aren't I? GB News has a problem. It has a choice. You can either be a controversial channel where people shoot their mouths off and sometimes overstep the mark, and then there's a bit of a fuss and you leave it at that. Or you can be MSM. You can do what the BBC does, only better, because you know that the BBC will jump on you for anything. In my previous video, which link there, or anyway, at least in the description. In my previous video, I point out things that have been said on BBC, which would have got GB News burnt. But not the BBC, of course, because they have more control over the media and the narrative. Right, so GB News can be that sort of controversial thing where they say we just don't care, or they can follow the BBC line and the ITV line or whatever, and the Guardian line, we mustn't forget that. So we follow that line, only even better than them, and become bland. Why would anyone want to watch them? They can just watch BBC, because at least BBC doesn't have the adverts. GB News, you really have to make your mind up here. You can say, okay, we're getting people who say weird things sometimes, and so long as they're not actually calling for people to be killed or maimed, which happens on... I'll just play just two of those again. One's Joe Brand, and one's a much beloved British comedian that I don't love very much, called Miriam Margolyes. I'll just play a couple of short clips from them.
I'm kind of thinking, why bother with a milkshake when you could get some battery acid?
Handled everything so far, Miriam?
I mean, I had difficulty not wanting Boris Johnson to die. I wanted him to die.
Now, they asked for maiming and death. Not just that they wouldn't touch somebody. You know, it used to be a woman, if somebody said they wouldn't want to sleep with her, I don't want to use that word again, it's just so distasteful. A woman, it would be, well, all right then. Now it's an insult. The world has completely done a 180 there, hasn't it? All right, so where was I? Yeah. GB News, you have to make your mind up. Do you want to be a controversial, interesting station, or do you want to be BBC bland? In which case, why would anybody bother watching you? Just make your mind up there. All right, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm, or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com, and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.